In the shadows of the dense forests and along the sun-soaked coasts of Central and West Africa, a tragic chapter in history began. Powerful and determined, European slave traders, alongside some West Africans and half-European merchant princes, ravaged these lands, capturing men, women, and children. These people, with their rich heritage and strong spirits, were torn from their homes and families, thrust into the brutal reality of slavery. In 1526, the first African slaves arrived in the Americas, brought by Spanish explorer Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón to the San Miguel de Galdape colony in present-day South Carolina. This new world was no refuge. Soon, a deadly struggle over leadership erupted within the colony. Seizing a fleeting opportunity, the enslaved Africans bravely revolted and fled into the unknown wilderness, seeking refuge among Native American tribes. As fate would have it, a devastating epidemic soon struck, claiming the lives of de Ayllón and many colonists, leading to the abandonment of the colony. Those who survived the chaos, both colonists and the few remaining slaves, returned to Hispaniola, where their journey had begun. In 1565, in the newly established settlement of St. Augustine in Spanish Florida, a remarkable union took place. Luisa de Abrego, a free black domestic servant from Seville, married Miguel Rodriguez, a white conquistador from Segovia. This was the first known Christian marriage in what would later become the continental United States, a symbol of hope in an otherwise grim era. Meanwhile, in Jamestown, Virginia, in 1619, the first recorded Africans arrived not as slaves but as indentured servants, working without wages for several years. Though their lives were harsh, with many facing brutal treatment, there was a glimmer of freedom at the end of their service. Some even managed to raise families, own land, and purchase their freedom. The mid-1600s marked a dark turning point in the colonies. The Virginia General Court recorded the first instance of lifetime servitude in 1640, sentencing an African man named John Punch to serve his master for life. This moment was a harbinger of the race-based slavery system that would soon take root. In Massachusetts, slavery was legally recognized in 1641, and by 1662, Virginia had passed a law declaring that the children of enslaved women would inherit their mother's status, binding future generations to a life of servitude. Even as the shackles of slavery tightened, there were instances of resilience and defiance. In Spanish Florida, some slaves found a path to freedom through conversion to Catholicism, as promised by King Charles II. Escaping the harsh realities of Georgia, many sought refuge in Florida, where they joined a growing community of free blacks. Spanish rule in Louisiana introduced the law of coartation, allowing slaves to buy their freedom, leading to a unique and often conflicted society where free blacks lived alongside enslaved Africans. As the population of enslaved Africans grew, fear among white settlers began to mount. In South Carolina in 1704, the first groups of armed white men were formed, known as slave patrols. These patrols were tasked with monitoring enslaved Africans, quashing any attempts at rebellion, and maintaining the oppressive order. Their presence was a constant reminder of the ever-present threat of violence that hung over the heads of the enslaved. Despite the overwhelming oppression, the spirit of the enslaved Africans was not easily crushed. Before 1800, African American congregations began to form, both in the northern and southern cities. These early churches, born out of the Great Awakening, became sanctuaries of hope and community. By 1775, Africans constituted 20% of the American colony's population, making them the second largest ethnic group after English Americans. Their resilience, faith, and unity were the foundations of a culture that would endure through centuries of hardship. As the flames of rebellion ignited in the 1770s, Africans, both enslaved and free, found themselves at the heart of a struggle for American independence. Many bravely joined the rebellious colonists in their fight against the British, with names like James Armistead, Prince Whipple, and Oliver Cromwell etched into the annals of history as heroes of the patriot cause. Yet, not all Africans fought for the same side. About 15,000 black loyalists stood with the British, seeking freedom through their loyalty. After the war, these loyalists found new lives, some settling as free black people in England, while others journeyed to distant lands like Nova Scotia and Sierra Leone, where they became part of the black Nova Scotians and Sierra Leone Creole communities. In Spanish Louisiana, Governor Bernardo de Galvez rallied Spanish-free black men to defend New Orleans during the American Revolution. These brave men formed 2 militia companies and fought valiantly in the 1779 battle where Spain captured Baton Rouge from the British. Galvez promised freedom to those who were gravely wounded and a chance to buy their freedom at a low price for those who were less severely injured. By the 1790s, Governor Francisco Luis Hector, Baron of Carondelet, had doubled the number of free black men in the militia, allowing them privileges that brought them closer to equality with whites, such as the right to carry arms. However, these privileges also created a divide, distancing free black men from their enslaved brothers. Slavery's roots in America were deepened by the U.S. Constitution itself. In the late 18th century, the notorious Three-Fifths Compromise and other provisions ensured that the institution of slavery remained untouched by Congress until 1807. The Fugitive Slave Laws of 1793 and 1850 further entrenched the practice, allowing slaveholders to reclaim escaped slaves even across state lines. Slavery, increasingly associated with black people, became a central and divisive political issue, leading to significant conflicts like the Missouri Compromise, the Dred Scott decision, and John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. By 1860, millions of Africans were enslaved, and even those who were free faced strict legal limitations. Some sought a new life in Liberia, a settlement founded in 1821 by the American Colonization Society, where abolitionists believed they would find true freedom. By 1815, the domestic slave trade had become a cornerstone of the American economy, forcing nearly 1 million enslaved Africans to endure a new Middle Passage as they were uprooted and transported across the country. The trauma of this forced migration, which historian Ira Berlin called the central event in a slave's life between the American Revolution and the Civil War, shattered families and severed ties to ancestral lands. As slaves were moved from place to place, many lost their cultural heritage and the knowledge of their African origins. In 1863, 2 haunting photographs emerged that would forever encapsulate the brutality of slavery. One showed Wilson Chin, a branded slave from Louisiana, and another captured the horrific scars on the back of a slave named Gordon. These images, among the first to use photography as a tool to expose the cruelty of slavery, stirred the conscience of a nation. Meanwhile, the idea of emigration to Africa gained traction, with free blacks considering relocation to Haiti or Canada, where the Wilberforce colony offered a new beginning for about 200 African American families. The American Civil War brought about a seismic shift with President Abraham Lincoln's signing of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. This historic document declared freedom for all slaves in Confederate-held territory, with Union troops enforcing it as they advanced. Texas was the last state to emancipate its slaves in 1865, marking the beginning of the end for slavery in the United States. With the ratification of the 13th Amendment later that year, slavery was abolished entirely. The 14th and 15th Amendments followed, granting citizenship and voting rights to black men, respectively. However, the end of Reconstruction in 1876 led to the rise of Jim Crow laws in the South, which imposed racial segregation and disenfranchisement, perpetuating inequality despite the legal end of slavery. As the 19th century drew to a close, a dark period in American history known as the nadir of American race relations began. Southern states enacted Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation, upheld by the Supreme Court's decision in Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896. These laws, Combined with widespread voter suppression, economic discrimination, and racial violence, deeply entrenched racism in American society. Despite these oppressive forces, African Americans like Anthony Overton and Mary McLeod Bethune persevered, building their own schools, churches, and businesses, striving to create spaces where their communities could thrive away from the harsh glare of white supremacy. This narrative, woven through the trials and triumphs of African Americans, reveals a legacy of struggle, strength, and unwavering hope. It is a story of a people who, despite facing unimaginable hardships, continued to fight for their rightful place in the world, shaping the course of American history.